And we're talking about the fact that God has incredible plans and purposes for every one of us. You know, before you were born, God had a dream for your life. He had a plan for your life, and it's a good plan. And it's a plan that your life would make a difference and an impact in the world. It's not that you would struggle. It's not that you would just survive. It's not that you would spend your whole life maintaining. And it is not that you would spend your whole life striving to get somewhere. But God's plan for you is that you would thrive as his child and fulfill the purposes that God had planned for you since the beginning of time. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. But here's the thing. So many of us, even those of us who believe in Jesus, so many of us tend to settle for far less than what God has promised us. And we settle for less in our money, in our relationships, in our lives, in our ministry, in our impact. We settle for less because honestly, settling is easier than trusting. But what we're doing in this series is saying, I'm not gonna settle, but I want everything that God has for me. Nothing but the best. So turn to the person next to you and say, I'm not settling. Awesome. I love that you guys did that. Every time a preacher does that, I feel awkward about turning to the person next to me and saying that. It's much less awkward telling people to do that than actually sitting there and doing it. How many of you felt awkward just then? Yeah, some people at South raising your hands. I know. It's awkward. It's weird. So turn to your neighbor that you didn't turn to. No, I'm kidding. Oh my gosh. I want to take you to a story in the Old Testament about a man who truly did not settle. And he had every opportunity in the world to settle, but he did not settle, he did not compromise, and he fulfilled the purposes that God had for him. But I want to set some of the scene for you. God had made an agreement with the people of Israel. It's called a covenant. It was an agreement with the people of Israel that these people would live a different type of life, and that their life would be different from all of the other nations around them. And the reason why they were meant to be different was because they were meant to be a living example of what happens when ordinary, imperfect humans are in relationship with an extraordinary good God. And he wanted the nations of the world to look at Israel and say, oh my gosh, I want what they have. And what they had was relationship with God. But if you know anything about the Old Testament, you know that the Israelites never lived up to the agreement. They couldn't, and they didn't. And they failed over and over again. But for every way that they settled for less than what God had said to them, it allowed destruction into their lives. And ultimately, over the course of time, it brought their entire society to a place where it basically failed. And a few different, empires invaded, and ultimately the whole thing came to an end when the Babylonians came into the capital city of Jerusalem and destroyed and leveled the entire city, and they basically killed just about everybody. But there was a remnant of people, or a group of people who were left, who were taken into captivity and carted back to Babylon, having left their home behind. And so the entire nation was destroyed, but there's a group of people, especially the best and the brightest of the Israelites, were taken by Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar to live in Babylon. And the smart guys and the people who were extra talented and extra charismatic were put into a training program to serve the king. And the Babylonians were ruthless, but they were not dumb. And so there was one man who was in this group called Daniil. And just for us to make sure we understand, Daniil is now living in a foreign city. He has watched his city and his nation and his family and his friends be completely wiped out and destroyed. And now the people who did that to him have taken him as a slave, and they are forcing him to serve the king, the very king who was oppressing his people. So if you're Daniil, how do you feel about this? Nah, it's the worst thing I could imagine. And so Daniil, though he's in this training program against his will, and in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 8, it says that Daniil resolved. I love that word. Can you say the word resolved? Daniil resolved. In other words, he made a decision. I am not where I want to be, and I did not choose to be where I am. But in this place, I am making a resolution, a decision. And the decision was that he wasn't gonna defile himself with the royal food and wine. Because the select people who were put into this group were given food from the king's table. So they're eating the best because the king thinks that these guys are the best and brightest and he wants to use their talent for the benefit of the empire. But Daniel's like, I don't wanna eat the food. And so he asks the chief official who oversaw him to show favor and compassion, for permission, I skipped the line, for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of the king who has assigned your food and drink. So why should he see you looking worse than the other dudes? The king would have my head if you look worse. And so Daniel's like, I don't wanna eat the food everyone else is eating. And here's why that matters. Because in the covenant that the Israelites had with God, there were certain foods that they were not permitted to eat. And so Daniel is in this terrible situation, but yet in this situation, he makes a determination that even though he's in a place that is completely out of his control, there are some things that are still in his control. And he makes a decision that even though I'm not where I wanna be, I'm gonna be faithful to God here. I'm gonna be faithful to God here. It goes on to say that Daniel said to the guard, verse 12, test me and my 3 boys for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine and gave them vegetables instead. Sounds awesome. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand dreams and visions of all kinds. All right, put yourself in Daniel's shoes for a minute, guys. You're in the worst place you can imagine. And the very people who've destroyed everything that you care about are now forcing you to serve them. What do you do? How do you feel? How do you react? See, because I don't like being in a situation in my life where I didn't have control over it. I don't like ending up somewhere that wasn't my choice. I mean, I can't tell you how bad my attitude has gotten when I end up being seated in an aisle on an airplane where I didn't want to be. I mean, that alone is enough to like send my head into explosion mode. And I don't have a temper. I'm not gonna be one of those guys who blows up on the stewardess or whatever, but I will sit there and be miserable. Have you ever been seated in the last row of an airplane? Yeah, there's like a wall behind you. And they tease you because they still have that button that makes it look like the chair reclines, but you push the button, it goes back a centimeter. And you're like, you're full of lies. Don't put the button on the seat if there's a wall behind it. I have gotten frustrated about being in situations that I did not choose. Come on. And how much more is Daniel in a situation that he did not choose? So what do you do when this happens to you in life? I think we all have the same initial reaction. The first thing we do is ask ourselves the question, who can I blame for this? Who can I make responsible for where I'm at in my life? Oh, and don't get me wrong, Daniel was not at fault for ending up where he ended up. He had nothing to do with it. It was not his fault. And there's a long list of people to blame. And that's what our nature is. Who's to blame? Whose fault? Who can we hold responsible for the things we don't like about our lives? It's our nature. I mean, we've been doing it since the beginning. Remember when Adam and Eve sinned? And God comes down to Adam and he's like, yo, what happened? Do you remember the first thing that Adam says? The woman made me do it. Remember this? Come on, guys, we come by it honestly. It's not my fault. Why are you looking at me? I didn't do it. It was her. And she comes up with some other excuse. You know what she says? The snake made me do it. And if I was God, I would be like, did the snake force the apple into your mouth? Whose fault is this? It's not my fault. Do you know why we like to blame other people? Because then we don't have to take responsibility for where we're at. Because then we can be miserable and throw a pity party for ourselves. And if I'm Daniel, that's what I'm doing. I'm sitting in my little cubicle, dorm room, whatever I am, and I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna be mad. And I'm gonna be mad at the king. I'm gonna be mad at my people who didn't fight them off. And I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna demand my right to hate my life. And demand my right to make sure that me and everyone else knows that it's not my fault. It's not my fault. And some of you are stuck in exactly where you don't want to be. And you're stuck because you won't take responsibility for where you are. And you know why you won't? Because it's easier to blame someone else. And Daniel was justified in the blame. It wasn't his fault. So our question is, who do I blame? It's my parents' fault. It's my spouse's fault. It's my boss's fault. Right? If it's not my fault, I can't do anything about it. And sometimes that's exactly where I want to be. Daniel doesn't ask this question though. He asks a different question. You know what his question is? I don't like where I am, but how can I be faithful to God even here? You might not like your job, but blaming people isn't gonna get you out of it. Do you know what's gonna get you out of it? Looking at your job and saying, how can I be faithful to God here? You may not like the dynamic that's in your home right now, but blaming everyone else for the problem isn't gonna change anything. The answer to the problem is, how can I be faithful to God even in a situation that I don't like? And Daniel says, how can I be faithful to God here? How can I honor my relationship with God here? How can I be true to the person that I want to be here? The second question that I would ask myself after who am I blaming? The second question is, how can I manage the situation a little bit so that it's at least a little bit more comfortable? Like, I might not control that I'm stuck where I'm stuck, but man, I can throw a pity party for myself and find some way to just cope a little bit better. Do you know what I do when I hate my life? Get a box of Oreos. They put crack in those things? They're so good, right? And I was like, the whole box is gone in like a second. What's that? It's not a box. What's it called? It's a package, a carton? Can we debate what this word is? It's a container, I don't know. It's a pile of Oreos. And you know what? I will sit there, I will blame everyone else, I will be mad about where I'm at, and I'll be like, who's bringing me the Oreos? What can I change to be a little bit happier? What can I do to be a little bit happier? I don't really like the fact that I'm not married, but if I'm hooking up with someone who I kind of like, at least it gives me a little bit more tolerance for where I'm at. I don't like where I'm at financially, but if I go on a shopping spree at Nordstrom, it helps it a little bit. What can I change to be a little bit happier? Go ahead and put that on the screen. That's the next question. But Daniel doesn't ask that question. Because let's be honest, if I'm stuck there, I want the wine and the food. And you know what? God didn't protect me from the situation. God didn't give me what I wanted. And so you know what? I don't care if I'm eating things that I'm not supposed to eat. Because when I'm miserable about my life, a little bit of compromise seems to make things a little bit better. Little compromise. wasn't like a massive compromise. It was just food. It was just a little bit of pork, you know, a little bit of lobster, a little bit of wine. It just got me through. But Daniil doesn't go there. Daniil actually says, no, I may not be in control of the life that I have today, but I am in control of whether or not I trust God. I am in control of whether or not I'm faithful to God. And Daniil doesn't ask what will make me happier. Daniil asks a different question. He says, what do I want most in my life? And what that means is, what sacrifices do I need to make now so that I can have what I want most? What sacrifices do I need to make now so that I can have what I want most? The Oreos make me happy, but they also make me sick. And the question is, do I want what I want now, or do I want what I want most? And the truth is, you can't have what you want most if you always settle for what you want now. Yeah, you can clap. If I were to ask this room and the room in Bridgeville and the family online, if I were to ask you what you want most when it comes to relationship, I'm pretty sure that the majority of us would give the same answer. What do you want most? A happy, healthy marriage, right? Lifelong, happy, healthy marriage. That's what I want most. The problem is what I do now before I have the happy, healthy marriage determines whether or not I end up in a happy, healthy marriage. But we don't like that message, because that message requires us to take responsibility for where we're at. And what I'd rather do is sit in my corner, have a pity party for myself, eat the Oreos and say, God, why isn't the right person showing up? Right? Because it's not my fault, it's his fault. And then you're like, okay, this is not the right person, but at least they're willing to spend time with me now. Right? And you're like, well, I just wanted a little bit because it made me a little bit happy. It's not what I really want, it's just a little bit of happiness. And what you did is you're playing games with what you want most because you're settling for something you want now. And this is why we settle, because it's immediate gratification instead of long-term promise. Is God gonna be faithful to you in your prayers for your marriage? Yes, he will. But you can stop believing for that promise anytime you want to. You can lower your standards and you can settle for something far less. It's like, I want a healthy marriage, but I also want to have sex now with the person I'm not married to. And I want a message from God that tells me that all of it's okay, because it makes me happy right now. But the problem is, the way I steward my sexuality when I'm not married plays right into what my sexuality is like when I am married. Because the moment you get married, your sexuality doesn't automatically change. What you cultivated when you were single is exactly what you have the fruit of when you're married. The same is true when it comes to our money. I could probably fill in the answer. What do you all want with your money? Like, what do you want ultimately most for your money? I think we would all say, I want to be a generous person. I want to be a blessing. I want to be good with money. And I want to have money left over at the end of the month. Amen? Like, I don't have to worry about my bills. That's what we would want with our money. That's what we want most. But then the question is, what do I want now? And the truth is, I want to go to Nordstrom now. Right? That's what I want now. I can't have both, because the way I cultivate my money now determines the financial situation I'll be in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And the truth is that no one ever got rich by spending more than they make. And you're like, I don't like that message. I like the message where God gives me the lottery winning ticket. I want that message. I want the message where I can screw everything up with my money, blow it on all kinds of stupid stuff, and God comes and bails me out in the end. I want that message, right? Amen, hallelujah. Sprinkle some pixie dust, go have a good life. That's the message that we want. And don't get me wrong, God will bail you out when you need him to bail you out. But let me tell you how he bails you out. He bails you out by teaching you how to cultivate what's in your hand. He teaches you how to cultivate what's in your hand. And so that conflicts with what I want, because cultivating my money today means I have to take responsibility for my money today. I don't want to be responsible with my money. I'm going to blame someone else for my money problems. Well, my boss doesn't value me enough, which is why I haven't gotten the raise. Oh, come on. The same way that you mismanage your money with the money you got today will be the exact same way that you mismanage your money when you get the raise. Right? I have to sacrifice what I want now for what I want most. Most people aren't willing to do that, which is why most people settle for less than God's best. Same thing is true when it comes to our health, right? I want to go on like the 30-day binge of like working out and not eating so that I fit into whatever I'm trying to fit into, right? But the truth is that if you want to be healthy, it's not a 30-day program. It's a 30-year, 40-year, 50-year program. It takes cultivation. I don't like that message though, because it means I've got to be responsible. And what I like is cake. And Oreos. And what I don't like is working out. Maybe I don't want to do that now, but what do I want most? The third question that I would ask, the first one is, who can I blame? The second question is, how can I be a little bit happier? The third question is this, how can I get other people to do what will make me happy? So again, it's like an avoidance of personal responsibility. It's like, what can I get everyone else to do so that my world is a little bit better? And this is where blaming ultimately leads you. I gotta control people, manipulate people, and convince people to do what I want them to do. Why? Well, because it's not my fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. But Daniil, again, he doesn't ask that question because he knows I can't really control other people. Do you know what question he asks? He says, what's the right thing to do? Regardless of whether or not other people even see what I'm doing. What's the right thing to do? Because you know what? Doing the right thing, the thing that honors God, is ultimately what leads you to the life that you want the most. But doing the right thing normally happens in secret before it happens in public. You want to be a person of integrity? You want to be a person other people trust? You want to be the kind of person other people want to be around? None of that happens in the spotlight. None of that happens on Instagram. All of that starts in the dark. But it's easy to say that the things that other people don't recognize don't matter. You know, it's like there's a part of us that's like, I want to serve God, right? And so showing up on a Sunday an hour early to serve in Kidsmen or on team, you know, it's beautiful, it's a great thing. But sometimes there's a part of us that's like, it's a great thing because other people see me doing it. And I want other people to see that I'm a great person. But the truth is that whether or not you're a great person has very little to do with what other people see and everything to do with what happens when nobody sees. See, choosing the right thing when no one can acknowledge you, that's where strength is built. That's where character is built. Man. I don't know what you look at on TikTok at midnight. And neither does anybody else. But when you're making compromises in that space, it lives inside of your soul. And it shows up in who you are. And that's a really uncomfortable truth. Well, not no one knows what you're watching on TikTok. The Chinese government does, but that's a whole other story. But little compromises in the dark, it's like no one knows, no one sees. It doesn't get any attention, but it affects who you are. I am not saying this to make you feel judged or condemned. It's not the point. Because condemnation is not gonna get you out of compromise. And judgment and shame is not gonna make you well and whole and healthy. what I want to do, what I'm trying to get across to you is this: there's a better way. And I can't control the decisions you make when no one's watching, and no one can, and I shouldn't, and I don't want to control it, and I don't want to try to control it. What I want you to do is to have resolve, to say, I know who I am, and I'm not perfect, but I know where I'm trying to go. And I want to be the kind of person who lives a life where I say nothing but the best. But it's not nothing but the best when other people recognize and acknowledge. It's nothing but the best because of who I want to be. I don't give to get acknowledgement. I give because I want to be a kind of person that represents the heart of God on the earth. I want to be faithful to who I was made to be sexually. Not because of other people's acknowledgement of that, but I want to be faithful to who I was made to be, who God designed me to be, because I want to be a whole, healthy person. It's not about what other people say, it's about who you are. And what are you cultivating there? But listen to the reward that happened to Daniel. Are you still with me, church? Are you still with me? You still awake? You still alive? All right. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned Daniel, he found Daniel 10 times better than all of the other magicians and wise men and enchanters in the whole kingdom. 10 times better. Why was Daniel 10 times better? Was it because he was talented? No, it's because he was faithful. Man. And so Daniel makes really hard choices to trust God in areas that aren't gonna get him famous. Eating vegetables? Come on. That sucks. I was like, Daniel's over here, he's like, I've been eating kale and carrots. And I'm like, why? He's like, because I was being faithful. I was like, don't lie. You had the Oreos under your bed, right? Like, you're out here playing at dinner with your kale rabbit food, and you're like, but I got a stash. No, the reason why Daniel had different power than everyone else had is because of the choices that Daniel made when no one was watching. Because when we trust God with our choices, God trusts us with his blessing. But I have to sacrifice what I want today for what I want one day. Today, I've got a lot of things I want. One day, that's what I'm living for. God's promises in my life. But God trusts you when you choose him. Now, if you make bad decisions, and if you live a sloppy life, and if you make a ton of compromises, it doesn't undo the cross. It doesn't undo the blood of Jesus. If you have accepted the blood of Jesus, you are saved. You are a child of God. You have a home in heaven. You are blessed and highly favored in the sight of God because of the blood and the blood alone. But I don't want to just be saved. I want to live a life of impact too. I want to live the kind of life that changes the world while I'm here. Man, the blood's not going to change no matter what you choose. But God does not bless people who have a different priority than him. You're saved, you're loved, you're called, you're chosen, you're beloved of God. But your life in this world will be impacted. And it's not because God's rejecting you or turning his back on you or hating on you, none of that. But the truth is that a healthy marriage takes cultivation. Healthy finances take cultivation. And when he sees people who are willing to make the hard choices in order to hold out for his best, do you know what he does? He dumps his blessing on those people. Why? Because he knows that you're not a container for blessing, you're a conduit for blessing. And God's got a mission and an agenda to accomplish on the earth. And people who settle for sloppy living and compromising and people who won't trust him with things, doesn't mean you're not saved. It just means if you can't trust God with your choices, he can't trust you with his purposes. And that's the truth. Now, again, this is not to judge you, condemn you, make you feel bad. Because condemnation is not gonna get you out of it. This is to get you to lift your eyes and to say, wait, I don't wanna make sloppy decisions. The Oreos ain't worth it. I want more. So Daniel chapter 1, Nebuchadnezzar looks at Daniel and says, you are 10 times better than every other leader I've got in my whole kingdom. I'm gonna entrust you with more. Daniel chapter 2, it says that the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men. Nebuchadnezzar saw Daniel, recognized the impact of Daniel's life, and what did he do? He entrusted Daniel with impact, influence, and leadership. Nebuchadnezzar dies, his son Belshazzar takes over. He is a wicked guy. But what happens in Daniel chapter 5? It says that Belshazzar looked at Daniel and saw that Daniel had, listen to this, an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding. He could explain riddles. He could solve problems. And it says that the king named Belshazzar recognized Daniel and put him into positions of influence and leadership. Belshazzar, that's a weird name. Belshazzar dies. Another king comes in and takes over. His name is Darius. And guess what happens when Darius figures out who Daniel is? It says, then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because why? An excellent spirit was in him. And the king Darius planned to set him over what? The whole kingdom. Darius dies. Another king comes up named Cyprus. Guess what Cyprus does to Daniel? Recognizes his spirit and trusts him with leadership. So I am telling you that Daniel outlasted 4 kings. And all 4 kings recognized that Daniel had something going on. And it wasn't his talent, it was his spirit. And because of his spirit, Daniel was deserving of being entrusted. And none of these kings were good guys. None of them honored God. None of them had a direct line to God. They all pretty much did not like God. But they couldn't lie about what they saw in Daniel. My God, I want to be that kind of person. And you would happen 4 evil kings come and go. And yet God raises up a man of God in the middle of an evil empire in order to preserve God's purposes through the evil reign of Babylon. I want to be that kind of guy. I want nothing but the best. I don't want to settle for compromises. And so it says that Daniel has an excellent spirit. And I'm like, okay, what's an excellent spirit? And I think that there's a spectrum. And there's a group of people here who, when you think of excellence, what you really are thinking is the word perfection. But perfection is not excellence, because perfection will never be achieved in your life. Listen to me, you're not perfect. And the people you do life with, they ain't perfect. And everything's not gonna be perfect. And sometimes when we live with a perfectionist attitude, it doesn't lead to health and thriving in life. It squashes everyone around you, because no one's ever good enough and you're never good enough. And because no one's ever good enough, you are never satisfied in life. No, excellence is not perfection. Perfectionism will destroy things. But then there's another side of the spectrum. And the other side are people who are not perfectionists. You're like, chill. Like, I'm gonna take it as it comes. And I'm gonna do the bare minimum required. You're like, what do I have to do in order to not get fired? I'm gonna do that. How late can I show up for work and not get yelled at? So I'm gonna show up at that time. What's the bare minimum I can do? And that's sloppy living, where you're like always living at the point of bare minimum. And you're the kind of person who goes to work, but your boss doesn't really enjoy you coming to work because you do the bare minimum. And you're like, well, I showed up, I did my job, and they ain't giving me a raise. And your boss is looking at you saying, I'm not promoting you to anything. You better be glad you're getting a paycheck at all. But you don't understand that that's what they're thinking, because you're over here saying, I'm doing my job. Bare minimum. That's not excellence, that's sloppiness. Bare minimum. What's like the longest amount of time I can leave dirty dishes in the sink before mold takes over my kitchen? Right? I mean, the boss won't notice it if I take some of the office supplies home for my own personal use. I mean, I punched in, but I didn't really start working for 2 hours. That's sloppy living. And so then Daniel shows up with an excellent spirit. Not perfection, but not sloppiness. You know what excellence is? An excellent spirit understands that everything I do represents God. Everything I do represents God. The way that I live my life, the way that I keep my home, the way that I treat my boss, the way that I treat my job, the way that I handle my money, all of it sends a message to the people watching me. And do you know what the message is? This person claims to be a man of God, a Christian. Everything I do represents to them the nature of God. No, it's not okay if there are smudges in the walls at church or dust bunnies in the corner. It's not okay if we're sloppy. Do you know why? Because this place represents God. And so does your life. And the truth is that you showing up an hour late for work or punching in but not really working or doing the bare minimum, there are people watching you saying, I know that you went to church last night. This must be what God is like. And a person with an excellent spirit is not burdened by that, but you own that responsibility. And you say, I want to represent God well. And I want people to look at my life and say, that's a good reflection of the heart of God. Not a perfect one, because I won't be perfect, but hopefully an accurate one. All right, so a couple commitments. I'm out of time, so I gotta go through this quickly. A couple commitments that Daniel made that I want us to make. And then we're gonna wrap this thing up and we're gonna praise and we're gonna let God do what he wants to do. Number one, I will have undivided devotion. See, this is Daniel. He goes into a terrible situation and he says, how can I honor God here? And most of us have a hard time with undivided devotion because normally our devotion is like, 14% for me and 86% for God. And we have competing devotions. But Daniel shows up in a terrible situation and he says, my number one priority is how do I honor God here? Number one, undivided devotion. Number two, I will have audacious faith. Now, I love audacious faith, and I talked about faith last week. And normally when we think about audacious faith, we think about the big things we're believing God for. I'm gonna have this big ministry one day, or I'm gonna, have this impact one day, or this kind of family, or this kind of house one day. And I hope you have faith for all that stuff. But what I've learned from me is that it actually takes more faith to trust God with the small things. Because let me tell you what happens to me a lot of nights. I'm exhausted when I'm trying to get the kids down to sleep at night. And do you know what I want in that moment? I want them to get in their beds, put the covers over their faces, close their eyes, and go to sleep. Because I'm tired and I can't go to bed until you go to bed. But you know what? I have that sliver of time with them every night. And my attitude will get me frustrated so fast. But an excellent spirit looks at that moment and says, how can I leverage that moment for the purposes of God? I might be tired, I might be frustrated, I might be ready for bed, but you know what? I'm gonna settle my emotions, we're gonna pray, we're gonna take a moment to be thankful, I'm gonna tell them how much I love them, and I'm gonna sit there until they fall asleep, and I'm gonna make that moment count. And let me tell you, that takes more faith than believing God for 5 more campuses for our church. But I wanna be a person who has faith for the small things. What I do in the morning matters. What I do in midnight matters. I can scroll mindlessly or I can spend the time praising. What I do when I'm frustrated, it matters. It matters. It matters because I wanna be the kind of person that represents the heart of God. Number 3, I will be supernaturally blessed. And this was Daniel. Daniel trusted God, and as a result, every single king recognized the blessing on Daniel's life. Your boss is not gonna think you are supernaturally blessed when you show up every Monday morning doing the bare minimum. Because you're not carrying no blessing. You're carrying a gotta get through this attitude. No. I'm walking in saying, I've got the blessing of God on my life. I'm gonna do the project, even though I'm mad that I got assigned the project, I'm gonna do the project the best that I possibly can. And this is what excellence is. Understanding that I'm representing God with what I'm doing. Not perfection, definitely not sloppiness. But you know what excellence is? Saying, here's what I've got. I'm gonna do the best I can with what I've got. Maybe guitar player, you don't have a $10,000 guitar and you can't buy a $10,000 guitar. But you know what you can do? You can make sure your guitar's in tune. You can put new strings on it. That's excellence. But a lot of us are like, well, when I get the $10,000 guitar, I'll put good strings on it. But that's not how it works. Do you know how it works? Doing great with what you've got today. That's what gets you to the $10,000 guitar. Next commitment, I will not produce anything sloppy. I won't produce anything sloppy. I'm not gonna, and it's not because I care about my productivity. It's because I care about my character. And my productivity represents my character. And the last commitment, and worship team, you can come on up. I will take responsibility for my life instead of laying blame. If you want to blame someone else for where you're at in life, you will find as many people as you want to blame. But the truth is that no one else can determine what's in your mind, what's in your soul, what kind of spirit you have. The world might be against you, but you still have the authority to decide who you're gonna be in that situation. People might have mistreated you, but you can still make a decision about the kind of person you're gonna be even there. You might not have the life that you want, the job you want, the money you want, the ministry you want, the acclaim you want, but you can still decide today what kind of character you're gonna have. Oh, you can do a bunch of stupid stuff and become Instagram famous like that. But I don't wanna be that. I wanna be the kind of person that 100 years after my death, a small group of people, maybe not everyone, but a small group of people, look back and say, I know Jesus because Jason Howard lived a life of excellence. I wanna be that guy. And that might not get me likes on Instagram, but man, does it represent the heart of God on the earth. So there's a psalm that I wanna read to you. It's one verse, and I want you to take note of this psalm because I wanna challenge you to pray this over yourself every day this week. Psalm 86, verse 11. Teach me your way, Lord. In other words, God, I wanna know what your way is. Not what my way is, what's your way? What's your way for my sex life? What's your way for my money? What's your way for how I handle my job, my career, my ministry? What's your way for the words that are coming out of my mouth? Show me your way so that I might trust your faithfulness and not my ability to make life what I want it to be. And then here's the most important part, and give me an undivided heart. I don't want dueling devotions, dueling priorities. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name. And that doesn't mean be afraid of you. It means be in awe of you. Be in wonder at who you are. It means to honor him. Can we stand to our feet here in the South Campus? I want us to pray this prayer together. All of us out loud together, making it true from our hearts to God. You with me? Put the verse back up on the screen, please. We're gonna pray it together. Can we say it out loud, all together? Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear. Come on, one more time. Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may. Can we do it one more time? Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear. All right, so only you know the areas of your heart where you are prone to compromise. As we worship, don't miss this moment. As we worship, this is our opportunity to say, okay, God, it's easy for me to compromise with this, or that. God, give me an undivided heart. Give me an undivided heart and surrender that area to him. It doesn't mean that you're gonna be perfect overnight, but what it means is that you're gonna make room for God to work in that part of your heart And all he needs, he doesn't need your perfection. All he needs is your willingness. God, you can come into this part of my life. I'm so glad that you tuned in today. Listen, God has an incredible, incredible story ahead for you, marked with his love and his goodness. Listen, why don't you go ahead and like the video? It helps other people see the video, and I believe that there's a message here that can help a lot of people. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you always see what's coming up here. And listen, we'd love for you to be a part of the Amplify family every single Sunday at 10, 1, and 6 Eastern Time. You can join us live on YouTube at the Amplify Church YouTube page to be a part of the Amplify family every Sunday. And if you'd like to be a part of what God's doing through Amplify, you can give at amplifychurch.com/give. I love you so much, and I am so glad that you are with me, and I believe that God has incredible things in store for you. See you soon.